Some of the content covered may be graphic in nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
This is a video game from the early 1980s, and what this really is, I guess you want to say it's a legend. This has not been proven or disproven. And before I get started, I also want to just say some of this information I got is provided by Eurogamer.net editor Jeff Matoleff. So I just wanted to put a shout out to him so where I got some of this information. Many people believe that the video game was a CIA experiment to test one's mental and physical agility as a method to recruit soldiers. People insist that this game caused seizures and brain aneurysms, and that there were actually men in black that came around and collected data from these arcade games. And of course, others feel that it's just a hoax that was made up in the early 2000s, and like everything just spread on the internet.
Do you think that this might be a case of the Mandela effect? Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, I have. You're told that it existed, so you think it existed.
Or potentially, or did people, experience a cross-dimensional shift or something where realities overlap, where you may have seen something that actually happened in your perception, but it never really happened in mine.
Funny you say that, because there's some theory of how this legend got started. Back in the early 80s, actually 1981, a few kids got sick in the Portland area in the arcades. One was a Mike Lopez. He was playing a game called Tempest and got a major migraine and had to be hospitalized. Another kid became ill after playing Asteroids for 28 hours straight. I would absolutely become ill for playing at 28. If anyone's ever played an old Atari game,
I'd probably become ill for playing it for about 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, quick question. Did anybody ever actually say what the game was like? Was it like Asteroids? Was it like Frogger? There wasn't a whole lot going on in the early 80s for, the difference in video games,
right.
Really.
Was there, a comparable title?
Well, the research I came up with did not mention what this game was like. Some people that stated that they played it said it had a hypnotic style sense to it, with tunnels and looking into things, but there's never been a research that I've seen that said what this was actually like or what it was about. So again, who knows if this really existed or not? It's one of those, again, like I said, a legend. But getting back to 1981, where people think this legend started, actually another kid had a massive heart attack while trying to chase a record in the game called Berserk. So you have 3 people there that got sick right in that same area, 1981. The legend could have grown from the fact that the FBI were doing raids and stakeouts on local Portland arcades for gambling and drug activity. Arcades, unlike now, if there's even that many that exist anymore, they were very notorious for that in the early 80s.
That's I even think about going backwards, and being an adult and understanding how the world works a little more, at that point in time, that probably was a really good money laundering scheme.
Sure.
Too.
Oh, man.
Absolutely.
Well, that's even laundromats as well. People would use to it sounds dumb to launder money, but think about it.
Comes in dirty, comes out, and then goes out clean, but
I don't know about you, Dan, you probably remember a little bit more, but even when I was growing up, old enough to really remember, say late 90s, very early 2000s, the only place you could really find an arcade was a Chuck E. Cheese or
a mall.
Dave and Buster's.
Yeah, a Home Days. I don't think Dave and Buster was even really as big until the mid 2000s, and at least
growing up, I don't ever really remember an arcade outside the mall.
And the mall, same thing. I mean, the arcades were popular in the 80s mostly, and I was a little kid in the 80s, so I don't even remember going to arcades that much. But by the early 90s, mid 90s, they were pretty much faded away, except for malls and stuff like that.
They were still pretty awesome, though. I mean, I remember for a couple bucks, for $20, if you'd go to the home days and they'd have the arcade set up, that was awesome. You could spend so much time there. Now, even if you go to an arcade like Dave & Buster's or any of the big
everything's
chain
done
ones,
on like credits,
and
on
it's
like
so expensive,
and it's all like preloaded, no coin drop.
The other thing is a lot of people wonder why there was such a large gap from 1981 to when Polybius was actually first mentioned on the arcade game resource site in the year 2000, called CoinOp. It's a forum for arcade games. The reason is that nobody could have or bothered to document it before the internet, or it's just nothing more than a hoax to begin with. So there was the reason why there's that long gap of it not being mentioned from 81 till the early 2000s. So the game maker, and this is interesting if this is a hoax, a lot of people put some time into this, but it's mentioned as Sin Lashin. I think I'm maybe butchering that name. I don't know if any of you guys does it look like it.
No, yeah.
Well, it's loosely translated in German into either sensory removed or sense removed. And that's the German meaning of it. Now, the funny thing too is this whole story with this Polybius has been associated with the CIA's MK Ultra, and that it was designed for mind control. And for anyone that doesn't know, MK Ultra started in the early 1950s and was officially canceled in 1973. Officially. So they say. Interesting enough on that, though, Jonestown Massacre of 1978, the mass suicide, has been associated with MK Ultra as well. That Jim Jones was part of the CIA experiment of mind control. But so, I mean, there's, if whether the CIA had anything to do with this or if this even existed or not, that's for everyone to decide and make their conclusions on. But it could be possible if anybody could get away with doing something like that. And the thing is, I mean, that's why you have to try to figure out, is it real? Is it legend? Did it come up from that story I told you what happened in the early 80s with the FBI, and it just got all merged together? Like you said, the Mandela effect too could have something to do with it. People just think that it existed when it really didn't. But now, one interesting thing, though, and even years later, people say they played it or knew someone that played the game for that short time. Like you said, it was only 1 month, so it seems kind of odd that you would remember something. But a man by the name of Steve Roach posted on CoinOp in 2006 that he was commissioned to build a game by a South American company, and that people actually got sick while playing it, so they recalled it. A Polybius expert by the name of Kat Dispera states that, in fact, there was a man by that name who used to run a behavioral modification program, and that they were testing kids in a child reform. Basically implied that it involved brainwashing. So, and it was, this gentleman is actually now on the run because of his abusive practices, of course. Although it can never be confirmed if the poster was the same Steve Roach or an imposter. At any rate, the poster states that the Sinslation, whatever the name of that company is, commissioned him to build the game. So again, there's a lot of weird things about this, though. What makes this weird to me, though, is that it's never been proven or disproven. No video game magazines of the time, of that era, early 80s, even mention Polybius. Nobody mentions it at all at the time. But if it did exist, it could be what you just said. It was gone so quick that no one ever had a chance to really, play it, other than just some people in the area, if it really existed. So you can draw your own conclusions on that.
And it's also showed up in pop culture. I think, didn't it show up in a cartoon of The Simpsons?
Simpsons.
Also, I know James Rolfe, Angry Video Game Nerd, he did not like a spoof, but he did a produced video where it was he went and played it, but then he started going crazy. It was like a gimmick for horror.
Right.
Around Halloween. But it was actually, it was pretty entertaining, so I always like his stuff. But, even him, he does this really good retrospective on all these bad games. And, he brings back, you were saying, how you don't remember what games you played were good or bad. He does a really good job of showing all the shit that was out there.
Plenty of it.
So, have you ever watched any of his stuff?
Yeah,
he's funny as fuck.
Yeah.
To kind of play the other side of the argument, there's, whether it's hand in hand with any kind of military organization or government or just a private organization, the idea that the reason they release so many war games and everything now is first-person shooter is to give you a simulation of any type of war or just combat training, and the people that are really, really good are essentially kept in mind for any type of, how do I want to word this? Basically, if you do really, really good or you do really well on some type of military game, they're going to keep an eye on you and possibly recruit you.
Right.
And I actually read a book that did the same thing. It was called Terra Firma, and basically it was people would play this video game, and then the top 10 in the world were actually recruited by a privatized or a secret army that was used to fight aliens. Now that's a fiction book. It's totally way out there,
but I remember even going to pick up Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, and there were army recruit people there.
Like back when the early games were first coming out, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was 2009 or 10 Modern Warfare 2 came out, and they're trying to recruit people to sign up. So
yeah, I mean, that right there kind of lends credence to the concept of the whole Polybius being used as the CIA or whoever is, recruiting, finding the best of the best.
Right, who could handle the game.
It's really funny how, as an adult, like, the world works by numbers, and everything is tied to a number. And if you think about, like, these games, you're always chasing a number or score, and, like, all these scores are stats, and, like, what better way to judge and weed out the good from the bad than something like this?
I think the reason that it seems a lot more of a possibility now than it did in the 80s, when you think of going to war, you think of a bunch of guys on the ground fighting, right? Well, we're getting to a point now where, you have unarmed drones that are going to potentially be used for warfare. And what's the best way to learn how to do that? Play a simulation that's a combat video game where you're not actually on the ground. You're doing everything first person, which is like what it would be if you're looking through the eyes of a camera on a drone.
That's a good point. But then, like, even when they were doing this kind of stuff, it still was, that boots to ground, brick and mortar method of, doing things. They could test reaction time. They could test, how people handle stressful situations, people getting sick, that's all just weeding out, again, the good from the bad.
That's just how it can start. And then it gets to the point where, they use flight simulation video games to teach pilots how to fly. You got to log so many hours. It's the same concept.
And the thing, too, is, MK Ultra, like we said, officially stopped in 73. Unofficially, MK Ultra lasted quite a bit longer. There's evidence that MK Ultra lasted well into the 80s and possibly even the 90s. So the fact that it could have been something, I'm not saying MK Ultra was involved in it, but the CIA, whether that name existed anymore or not, I don't know. But CIA was still working with mind control. They weren't doing so much drugs and LSD anymore like they were doing in the 50s and 60s, but they could have found more humane ways to do testing. And what better way than have people play a video game? So whether it's fact, legend, or just a elaborate hoax that was made up, you be the judge.
Coming up on the next episode of Type 3 TV.
Where this actually gets kind of weird is in 2015, people started finding pictures of supposedly the astronauts, and they're still alive.
Well, that's it for this week's episode. If you like what you saw, please like, share, subscribe, and comment below. I'm John Budzinski. From The Mistake on the Lake, this is Type 3 TV. Over and out.